our final speaker.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank the Speaker, and I thank the gentleman, my good friend, for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition to the rule, and I want to urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to defeat the previous question so the House can vote on my bipartisan, I want to emphasize that, bipartisan legislation entitled the Presidential Tax Transparency Act. Now, this bill codifies the long-standing bipartisan tradition of presidents and presidential nominees disclosing their tax return information to the American people. Now, as was said previously, yesterday was tax day, and it's an important reminder that as millions of Americans fulfill their duty to file their income tax returns, the President of the United States of America still refuses to release his tax returns to the American people. I think holding the highest office in the land is transparency, yet the President refuses to honor what promotes trust with the American people. And as I said, both Republican and Democratic presidential candidates going back to Richard Nixon all voluntarily put their tax returns out to the American people. Why? To establish trust, that they were transparent and that the American people could see whether there were any potential conflicts of interest and many other things, because tax returns are highly instructive. And as I said, that has gone on for decades. I wrote this legislation because in 2016, and I wrote it in 2016, there were two candidates, one from each party, that refused to put out their tax returns. And I did not think that that was honoring the American people. Now, by refusing to make his tax returns public, the President implies he's hiding important information from the American people. So what this legislation does, and again, I want to reiterate it, it is bipartisan, it places into law disclosure by requiring the current president and all presidential nominees of both parties to release their tax returns. Because again, in a democracy, truth and transparency should be the gold standard. Presidents and presidential candidates should be held to the highest standard of transparency to ensure that the interests of the American people are met. Now, tax returns contain vital information, whether the candidate has actually paid taxes, what they own, how much they've borrowed, who they've borrowed from, whether they've made charitable donations, what tax loopholes have they taken advantage of, and exactly what they are, if they have. They're also highly instructive as to any conflicts of interest. The current president has 564 financial positions in companies located in the United States and around the world, according to the Federal Election Commission, making him more susceptible to conflicts of interest than any president in our history. Only a full release of his tax returns will provide the public with clear information as to his potential conflicts of interest and his potential entanglements with foreign governments and foreign businesses. This legislation, again, is bipartisan because transparency and good governance are not partisan issues. According to a recent poll, 67% of the American people—
An additional 30 seconds.
The gentlewoman's recognized for an additional 30 seconds.
67% of Americans believe the president should release his tax returns, just as all of his predecessors since Richard Nixon have done. During the campaign, the president even promised he would do so before falsely claiming that he couldn't release his tax returns because of an audit. There is no such thing. Yesterday's editorial board of the Washington Post wrote, "The president is setting a precedent that presidents can promise one thing, do another, and end up dismissing essential standards of disclosure. Congress shouldn't accept this. This is an erosion of
Gentlewoman's
good
time has
government
expired.
practice. So, Mr. Speaker, I couldn't agree more. And again, I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, your constituents will reward you for this, because this is about transparency, about our democracy,
Gentlewoman's time.
about transparency being the gold standard.
Gentleman from
I
Washington
yield back.
continues to reserve. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.